Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. Where did the virus come from? More and more fingers are pointing to a lab in Wuhan. The evidence is piling up. The inconsistencies in China's story are becoming starker. Tonight, we show you some new findings. A video that shows virus hunters in a Chinese bat cave. What were they looking for? What did they find? What is their link to the outbreak? Then we have a report on how China may have deleted a major virus database. Information on 22,000 virus samples was suddenly hidden. Why was this done? They have an explanation that does not add up. We'll tell you what it is. Plus, questions are being asked on what the Chinese military's top general was doing in the Wuhan laboratory. America has already ordered a probe. Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has been linked to the Wuhan lab in the past, has now demanded medical records of lab workers. The story is heating up. We have all the updates for you tonight. Also on the show, Europe continues to be the biggest roadblock in fixing vaccine inequity. It continues to block patent waiver. And it is now set to present a new proposal. We have the details. In Israel, the political churn continues. A new prime minister may take office soon. Will it be Naftali Bennett? Who is this man? We'll introduce him to you. In France, the tightrope walk continues for the government. Blasphemy versus hate speech. A new case throws up an old debate. And would you pay $18,000 for art that you cannot see? Believe it or not, an invisible sculpture has been auctioned in Italy. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Facebook to end a controversial policy which protects politicians from the platform's content moderation rules that apply to other users. Earlier, Facebook's oversight board had affirmed the decision to suspend former US President Donald Trump from the platform. A member of Japan's Olympic Committee says that the coronavirus postponed event had now lost meaning, but it was too late to cancel the same. This as public opposition to holding the Games on July 23rd remains high as volunteers recently quit over coronavirus concerns. The European Union's top court rules that Germany persistently violated EU limits on air pollution, adding that authorities did not take appropriate measures to tackle air pollution. The ruling could lead to financial penalties for Germany if it fails to improve the air quality in some of its biggest cities. In a sign of further tensions between the US and China, President Biden has added more Chinese firms to his blacklist of companies that are off-limits for American investment. The US says these blacklisted firms have links to Beijing's military-industrial complex. Envoys from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations arrive in coup-hit Myanmar to chart out an end to the political turmoil in the country. The envoys are set to meet with the military junta's leader Min Aung Hlaing as Myanmar enters its fifth month of unrest. A new study finds that sea ice in the Arctic's coastal regions may be thinning twice as fast as previously presumed. The assessment comes after research teams used more up-to-date maps of snow depth on the ice, which has been retreating for decades due to global warming. In a latest hardline immigration measure, Denmark passes a law to relocate asylum seekers outside of Europe. The law will allow Denmark to move people out of the country to have their asylum cases reviewed. A move slammed by rights groups and the United Nations. Even as its health system is overstretched due to an increasing death toll due to COVID-19, Colombia approves the reopening of most large events previously banned due to the pandemic. Colombia has recorded more than 90,000 deaths due to COVID-19. World number 4 Aryna Sabalenka has become the latest big-name casualty at the French Open, which has left the women's draw without its top 3 seeds. Sabalenka was the highest-ranked player still standing after the exits of Ashley Barty and Naomi Osaka. But the big-hitting Belarusian made 39 unforced errors against Russia's Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova to crash out in the 3rd round. 6 of the women's top 10 seeds have already crashed out. Defending champions Los Angeles Lakers have crashed out in the first round of the NBA playoffs after a 4-2 series defeat to the Phoenix Suns. The Lakers needed to win Game 6 to stay alive, but they could not recover from the loss of Anthony Davis to injury in the first quarter itself. Devin Booker scored a game-high 47 points as Phoenix won 113-110.
Tonight, I want to show you a video of Chinese virus hunters. Yes, there is such a thing, virus hunters in China. This video is from the Chinese state broadcaster CCTV. It was released on the 10th of December 2019. Note the date, 10th December 2019, around the same time when patients in Wuhan had begun showing pneumonia-like symptoms. This video shows a Chinese scientist on a mission inside a cave filled with horseshoe and popistrel bats. Look at this.
蝙蝠的生活环境都在人迹罕至的洞穴，但只有这样的环境，才能找到最理想的病毒媒介样本。最安全了。这里的蝙蝠它主要是菊头蝠和蝠翼蝠。如果说我们的皮肤裸露，很容易接触到蝙蝠的排泄污味的物体，所以说这个风险比较大。要探寻出一个蝙蝠族群。
What was this man up to? Was this the moment when Chinese researchers scooped up the Wuhan virus? Is this video linked to the pandemic in any way? We can't say because China doesn't share information. It won't tell the world what these researchers were doing in bat caves. The man leading this team is called Tian. Reports say he worked with the Wuhan Center for Disease Control, or the Wuhan CDC. It is the agency that led China's early pandemic response. And I know what some of you may be thinking. If China had something to hide here, why did they release this video? Which is why we told you to note the date of the release. Early December 2019. That's when the video was released. This was before the pandemic blew up in their face. It was a different time. China was not under global scrutiny then. Because it wanted to project itself as a leader in viral research, it released a video like this. It wanted to show how dangerous the task to hunt for these viruses is. Here's what China did not show or tell the world. What did researchers find in these bat caves? When was this virus hunting mission conducted? Not only will they not answer, the Wuhan CDC denies storing any bat coronaviruses before the pandemic. And that's hard to believe because in this same video, Tian, the researcher, claims that he visited dozens of caves and studied 300 types of virus vectors.
In the past 10 plus years, we have visited every corner of Hubei province. We have explored dozens of undeveloped caves and studied more than 300 types of virus vectors.
These inconsistencies are the reason why we need to investigate the lab leak theory further. Last year, the very idea of a lab leak was instantly dismissed. But now there's a mountain of circumstantial evidence, and it's simply too big to ignore. An investigation by the Vanity Fair reveals more circumstantial evidence. And at the center of everything is the Wuhan Institute of Virology, better known as the Wuhan Lab. The piece talks about something called Drastic. It's a group of individuals who are using open source information to find the origins of the virus. And this includes scientists and science enthusiasts. Together, they have found a lot of material and papers. They say the Wuhan laboratory was extensively working on bat coronaviruses. They also point out how the SARS virus managed to escape Chinese labs. Now, these findings are interesting, but we cannot independently verify them. What we can say for sure is this: it was premature to dismiss the possibility of a lab leak. It needs to be investigated. The report focuses on the Wuhan lab. It argues why this lab cannot be given a clean chit just yet. When the pandemic began, American investigators began looking into this lab, and they collected classified intelligence that showed how the Wuhan lab was not as safe as advertised. Apparently, research into coronaviruses was being conducted in less secure laboratories. And some of this research involved dealing with SARS-like viruses. A delegation of American officials visited the Wuhan laboratory in 2018. They conducted an assessment, and they found that there was a shortage of highly trained technicians and clear protocols. And these are lapses that could have threatened the safety of this facility in Wuhan. Which brings me to Shi Zhengli, the Batwoman of China. She was overseeing China's research into bat coronaviruses. At every given opportunity, she has denied the possibility of a lab leak. In fact, she, quote-unquote, guarantees on her life that the pandemic has nothing to do with the lab. But rhetorical statements cut no ice when seen in the context of facts. China's Batwoman has a lot of explaining to do here. Reports say the Wuhan lab had access to some 22,000 virus samples and sequences. 22,000 samples. And all of these have now been taken offline. The WHO investigators, by the way, saw no problem with this, the fact that these samples were taken offline. The Batwoman, she claimed that the database was taken down because of hacking attempts during the pandemic. One of the investigators said that this was absolutely reasonable, and they never really felt the need to even ask to see the database. Now, she claims that she was protecting her research from hackers during the pandemic. But here's the thing. The database was actually taken down in September 2019. This was 3 months before China officially declared an outbreak. This was 6 months before it was called a pandemic. Why did they delete the virus database in September 2019? Here's another question that they failed to answer. What is the Wuhan lab's relationship with the Chinese military? Was the Wuhan lab working on projects for the PLA? We already know that the Chinese military was involved in the lab when the pandemic began. Major General Chen Wei, China's top virologist and biochemical expert, had moved to Wuhan with her team. What was an army general doing in a bio-research lab? American intelligence has more inputs. They say that they have reason to believe that Chinese military and civilian researchers were working on quote-unquote animal research side by side. Long story short, there are clear inconsistencies in China's stories. Now we have Chinese virus hunters caught on video, claims of leaky laboratories, missing databases on viruses, and the presence of the PLA in a bio-research lab. Put all of this together, and the lab theory starts looking more plausible. It should only be a matter of time before the world pieces together the evidence to hold China accountable and hopefully make China pay. As for China, it is already rejecting any demands for more investigation, but that does not mean that the scrutiny has stopped. The latest to demand answers from China is a man whom many say has been a friend of China. America's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he wants Beijing to share medical records of researchers at the Wuhan laboratory. And the mine workers, basically a total of 9 people who fell ill with symptoms consistent with the Wuhan virus. Dr. Fauci wants to see their medical records. And this is interesting because in the recent weeks, it's Dr. Fauci himself who's been in the dock. He was hit by a barrage of accusations, mostly from members of the Republican Party. He was slammed for playing down the lab leak theory. He was interrogated for funding research at the Wuhan laboratory. So which side is Fauci on? What are his connections with the Wuhan lab, and why has he been called a friend of China? Our next reporter tries to join the dots.
He has been the face of America's pandemic response, a voice of reason during the chaos of the Trump administration. But in recent weeks, Anthony Fauci has faced a host of accusations. Lawmakers have implied that Fauci funded risky research at the Wuhan lab.
Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect.
Fauci's own emails don't help his case. Between March and April in 2020, Fauci exchanged several emails with experts on the issue of origins. When one expert asked if the virus was released from a lab in Wuhan, Fauci shared the email with a colleague, asking them to handle it. Fauci even got a thank you note for publicly standing up to support the natural origins of the virus. Fauci exchanged emails with the top Chinese virologist too. When George Gao wrote to Fauci to check up on him, Fauci replied, "We'll get through this together." He has also been linked to the controversial Wuhan lab and faced questions on why America funded research at this laboratory in China. So does Fauci really have any links to the Wuhan lab? Anthony Fauci heads America's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. It is one of the 27 institutes and centers that makes up America's National Institute of Health. It's the primary agency of the US government for public health research. It was the NIH, and not Fauci in particular, who gave funding to the Wuhan lab. Xi Zhengli, famously known as China's Batwoman, claims she got more than $600,000 from the NIH. But the NIH wasn't the only American agency funding her. The US Agency for International Development, or USAID, also gave more than $500,000 in funding to Xi. A large part of these funds actually came from the EcoHealth Alliance that had allocated millions of dollars in grants to researchers around the world. So yes, America was funding research at the Wuhan lab. But did the money go towards risky research? Fauci denies this claim.
We have not funded gain-of-function research on this virus in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, no matter how many times you say it,
there was research.
Now the US president himself has ordered a probe into the origins of the virus. So Fauci has asked China to come clean. He had called on Beijing to release the medical records of 9 people. Who are they? 3 of them are researchers from the Wuhan lab. Reports say they fell sick in November 2019 and were taken to a hospital. The other 6 are minors. They had fallen ill after a visit to a bat cave in 2012. They developed symptoms consistent with the Wuhan virus. In fact, 3 minors had died due to the illness. Fauci wants information on them. He says researchers should stay open-minded about the lab leak theory.
No, I'm not convinced about that. I think that we should continue to investigate what went on in China until we find out, to the best of our ability, exactly what happened. Certainly, the people who've investigated say it likely was the emergence from an animal reservoir that then infected individuals, but it could have been something else, and we need to find that out.
Is he speaking on the basis of more evidence, or is this a politically convenient shift of tone? Whatever the case, Fauci has joined a growing list of experts and scientists who are warming up to the possibility of a lab leak and not shy of saying it out loud. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Even amid increased efforts to fight.
Europe has made a nasty habit of sticking to the wrong side of history. It might sound like a sweeping statement, but think about it. Europe has always thrived at the expense of others. They are the true pioneers of apartheid. It's a habit they're finding difficult to shake even in the 21st century. This time, it is not racial or ethnic. It's about vaccines. It's about the money involved in vaccines. Last year, India and South Africa submitted a proposal at the World Trade Organization, WTO. It was a straightforward proposal, fairly simple. They wanted to waive patents for Wuhan virus vaccines. As expected, the pharma lobby pushed back. And they had ample support from the West. Nearly 8 months later, the United States relented. Joe Biden agreed to waive patents. It was a surprise decision because this puts America and China on the same page. Both of them wanted to waive patents, both of them supporting India's initiative. Great news. Surely it was only a matter of time before Europe followed. Wrong. Do not underestimate the power of Big Pharma, the kind of clout they have in Europe. Brussels is still holding out. Next week, the WTO will debate the patent waiver, but Europe is heading to Geneva with an alternative proposal. One that does not involve waiving patents. How is Europe justifying this? They have two key arguments. One, a waiver will not boost production in the short run. And two, it will remove incentives for pharma companies, especially in updating vaccines to keep up with mutants. Do these arguments sound familiar? I'm sure they do. Because it's directly from the pharma playbook, the big pharma playbook. The similarities do not end here. The European proposal has three goals. Number one, to loosen export restrictions. Talk about hypocrisy. Let me take you back to March 2021. The same European Union restricted vaccine exports. They saved up jabs for their own people first. It was actually the EU that set off the ugly trend of vaccine nationalism. And now with herd immunity around the corner, they want to loosen exports. Number two, voluntary licenses. Now this is when a patent holder authorizes other companies to produce their drug, like the agreement between AstraZeneca and India Serum Institute. But such deals just can't cut it. For starters, there aren't enough of them. Africa is producing just 1% of its total vaccines. The rest is imported. So voluntary licenses are just an extension of the vaccine apartheid. Number three, to activate the WTO's TRIPS mechanism. What does that mean? What is TRIPS? It stands for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. During emergencies, the TRIPS permits compulsory licensing. Basically, it means that a government can sidestep or override patents. This might seem like a perfect solution, but it's a minefield. Overriding patents is only half the job. Reverse engineering the vaccine will likely take months, and we don't have that kind of time. India's proposal at the WTO accounts for this. It covers not just patents, but copyrights and trade secrets. And that's the big difference between the two proposals. The European one also gives you the vaccine secrets, but it's encrypted in a secret code. And you have to break that code to get the vaccine recipe. The Indian proposal is wholesome. It's a step-by-step guide for producing the vaccine. This week, two more countries endorsed India's proposal, New Zealand and Ukraine. But the EU, the UK and Switzerland are still not on board, which means the proposal is likely to be dropped. For Big Pharma, it's mission accomplished. They waged a fierce lobbying campaign at Brussels and it paid off. Let me pull up some numbers for you and they will tell you how wide Big Pharma cast its net. In 2020, they spent $44 million on lobbying. $44 million. The most prominent group, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, they ramped up spending by 20%. All this money meant more access. Pharma companies held 140 meetings with European officials. Guess how many meetings pro-waiver groups got? One meeting. At any given time, there are 290 lobbyists in Brussels, and there could be hundreds more in the member capitals. We've already lost a lot of time debating waivers, 8 months to be precise, and in this time we could have set up new production lines, we could have vaccinated millions of people. But there's no point in dwelling on what could have been. European nationalism ravaged the world once. It divided us into first, second, and third world. Years later, it's almost like nothing has changed. After 4 elections in 2 years and the deadliest conflict with Gaza in a decade, Israel may now be headed for a change of guard. Naftali Bennett used to be called a kingmaker in Israel. Will he now take the prime ministerial throne? He is 22 years younger than Benjamin Netanyahu. He says he's more right-wing, more nationalist. He does not support a two-state solution, and he has gone on record to advocate the murder of Palestinians. Who is this man? Our next report tells you about Naftali Bennett, who is tipped to be the next Prime Minister of Israel.
Naftali Bennett. It's a name that many say is synonymous with the Israeli cause. It could also be the name of Israel's next Prime Minister. But who is this guy? And how did he get where he is? Bennett is a native Israeli born to American immigrants in a country where military service is mandatory for all adults. He started his career by joining an elite commando unit of the Israeli army. He served during the First Intifada, the South Lebanon conflict, Operation Grapes of Wrath, and the Second Intifada. Along with his military service, Bennett also built a career as a software entrepreneur. In 1999, he co-founded a payment security company, Koita Inc., which was sold for $145 million in 2005. The next year, in 2006, Bennett entered the world of politics. He joined the then leader of the opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, and served as chief of staff till 2008. In 2011, he co-founded My Israel, a political movement which claims to have 94,000 members. In 2012, he was elected as the party leader of Jewish Home, an Orthodox Zionist political party. In 2013, he was appointed the Minister of Economy and Religious Services in the Netanyahu government. In 2015, he was made the Minister of Education. And in 2018, he rebranded Jewish Home as Yamina, or the New Right. Now, for all his achievements in the field of defense, politics, and business, Naftali Bennett is a highly controversial and polarizing figure. He has repeatedly dismissed the two-state solution, saying Israel should annex 60% of the West Bank. He also says the formation of a Palestinian state would be suicide for Israel. And in 2013, during a cabinet debate on releasing Palestinian prisoners, Bennett reportedly said, "If you catch terrorists, you simply have to kill them. I have killed a lot of Arabs in my life, and there's no problem with that." A statement the Israeli media says wasn't just rhetoric. This leader has actually been accused of killing 102 civilians. During Israel's 1996 operations in Kana, a village in Lebanon, Bennett was the commander of the company that led the operations. But today, the debate doesn't rest around the morality of this leader. His supporters say that Bennett's previous statements and actions are irrelevant to the kind of prime minister he will be, because today he's speaking of uniting Israel.
כל המפלגות מוזמנות להיכנס לממשלה.
All parties are invited to join the government, and for the coalition to succeed, we all as partners will have to show restraint, both during the negotiations and later on. Nobody is requested to give up on their ideology, but everybody will have to postpone the realization of part of their dreams.
חלק מהחלומות.
Does he have the numbers? Bennett's party has 7 seats in a parliament of 120. It has formed a coalition with Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid, the second largest party in Israel. It has 17 seats. With all their allies put together, some of whom also happens to be Arabs, this coalition has 62 seats. Just what it needs to form a government. Bennett has written to the president seeking his appointment as prime minister. All that remains now is a floor test in the Knesset. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
China is synonymous with opacity, obscurity, and secrecy. Think about it. We still don't know how many people died of the Wuhan virus in China or how many Chinese soldiers died in last year's Galwan clash. We also don't know how many people died at the Tiananmen Square on this very day 32 years ago. China champions the art of clamping down.
A voice in the morning now, she calls me. Her radio reminds me of my home far away. Driving down the road, I get a feeling that I should have been home yesterday. Country road, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country road.
32 years ago, on this very day, China massacred democracy. It declared a war on its own people. The battleground was Beijing's Tiananmen Square. The story begins on the 15th of April 1989. Leading reformer and former Communist Party chief Hu Yaobang had died. Chinese students poured into the Tiananmen Square to mourn Hu's death. Soon the mourners began demanding reforms. What kind of reforms? Democracy and liberty. Students submitted a letter listing their demands to the government. The reply came in the form of a stinging editorial. The Communist Party mouthpiece called the students planned conspirators. The students were enraged. Thousands from across China came to Beijing to join these protests. On the 13th of May, they began a hunger strike. 5 days later, students began to faint. On the 19th of May, Communist Party chief Zhao Ziyang visited Tiananmen Square. He urged the students to disperse from the square. They did not. On the 30th of May, students unveiled a 33-foot statue at the square. It was called the Goddess of Democracy. 3 days later, everything changed. 9:55 p.m. 3rd of June. Authorities asked people to stay away from Tiananmen Square. Soon the lights went off, tanks started rolling in, troops marched in. The order from the CCP was to vacate the square by 6 a.m. Chinese troops fired at unarmed students. Sounds of gunfire were heard throughout the night. The Goddess of Democracy was pulled down. No one knows how many students were killed that night, but along with them died the hope for democracy in China. Beijing swore to never allow protests to reach the scale of Tiananmen. It rewrote its playbook to ensure no space for political reform and human rights. China redefined socialism. Everything was done to ensure that history does not repeat itself and the ghost of Tiananmen does not resurface. So some 30 years later, when the echoes of this protest were heard in Hong Kong, China slapped an outrageous law. It outlawed secession, subversion, and collusion with foreign forces. China could not deploy tanks to downtown Hong Kong, so it crippled the city-state with a security law. It induced fear in the hearts of people by arresting key figures of the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement. 1 year on, Hong Kong's annual candlelight vigil in memory of Tiananmen Square has been banned. The site has been sealed off. Its organizer has been arrested. Why? Apparently, Wuhan virus.
I must stress that unauthorized assembly is an offense. In fact, it is a very serious offense that facing the penalty of a maximum of 5 years imprisonment.
The June 4th Museum in Hong Kong has also been shut down, apparently over a licensing probe. China can suppress the demand for democracy, but it cannot silence it. What you see on a screen is the Pillar of Shame. It's a structure in Hong Kong that commemorates the Tiananmen Square victims. Earlier today, students of Hong Kong University gathered in front of the sculpture. They laid flowers. They observed a moment of silence. The spirit of Tiananmen Square is still alive in the students of China. US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken tweeted, June 4th is the 32nd anniversary of the PRC's deadly crackdown in Tiananmen Square, killing thousands of protesters simply calling for their rights and freedoms to be respected. Human rights are universal, and all governments must protect and promote them. Well, here's something you should know. 32 years back, the US was shy of calling out China. Today, it is taking the dragon head on. Many other countries like America have changed their approach towards China in the last couple of years. They have come to realize that China cannot be allowed to terrorize people at home and outside. In 1989, China killed unarmed students and threw all details under the table. 31 years later, it provoked Indian soldiers in Ladakh and suffered heavy casualties, but covered up the numbers again. The same year, China also exported a virus, one that went on to kill millions of people across the world. But once again, China scrubbed all records. Nothing was shared, either on the virus or its origin or the real death toll in Wuhan. In 1989, China was globally isolated for the Tiananmen Square massacre. 32 years later, anti-China sentiment is at the highest since the Tiananmen Square massacre. And I'm not saying this. A dossier by China's Ministry of State Security is saying this. Sooner or later, the world will make China pay. When two cultures clash, it's never a seamless affair. Especially two cultures that have vastly different ideas on life. In France, this clash has created an identity crisis for the Republic itself. France puts freedom of speech above everything else. It's been a hallmark of their democracy, they say, and for decades this was not a problem because France was a largely homogeneous society, a common religion, a common ethnicity. There was little scope for taking offense. But that's not the case today. France is slowly turning into a melting pot. Every culture, every religion is fighting for its place in this republic. Sometimes this fight turns ugly. Let me tell you one such story. It's about a French teenager who goes by the name Myla. Starting last year, she unleashed a wave of abuse against Islam. In January, she said, and these are her words, "The Quran is filled with nothing but hate. Islam is a shitty religion." When she wrote this, she was 16 years old. Some of the other stuff she wrote is even more abusive. It is not fit for television, for that matter, not fit for a civilized society. The response she got was even more aggressive. Myla's lawyer says she received 100,000 hateful messages, 100,000. Some of them threatened to cut her up. Others threatened to behead her. It's truly appalling stuff. The French leadership came to Myla's defense. This is what President Emmanuel Macron said. The law is clear. We have the right to blaspheme, to criticize, and to caricature religions. So a criminal probe was announced. 13 people were rounded up, all of them between 18 and 35 years of age. The charges? Cyberbullying and death threats. Thursday was day one of their trial. If convicted, they face up to 3 years in jail and $55,000 in fines. But what about Myla? Her comments were nothing short of hate speech. In fact, there was a legal complaint filed against her, but the investigation was dropped because officials said they had no evidence. Almost 1 year later, she sticks by what she said. Fear is changing sides. That's what she had to say after the first day of trial.
La peur change de camp.
Fear is changing sides. The more of us who speak out, the stronger we will be. The more powerful we will be in the face of threats and harassment, which will only get worse if we do nothing, if we continue to submit.
Let's get one thing straight. Both sides are wrong here, both sides, but only one side is getting punished. This teenager is hiding behind freedom of speech, just like President Macron is hiding behind the right to blasphemy. But here's the thing about rights. They're not to be misused. Purposely triggering your fellow citizens is not free speech, it is hate speech. France's militant interpretation of its laws is polarizing the country. And don't get me wrong, the death threats are a far bigger crime, yes, and they must be punished. But the problem is the state is addressing only the reaction, not what triggered this reaction. In the long run, it will make things worse, divide the society even more. So what's the solution here? It's fairly simple. Evolve with the changing times. And this is not the France of the 19th or the 20th century. This is a more diverse France. In public, President Macron has praised this diversity. But his country's laws need to keep pace. If France wants a united society, it must create responsible citizens. It must pull up loose cannons who try to disrupt this peace. Like this young woman, Myla, she's a teenager, probably influenced by her parents or someone in her inner circles. Apparently, she's writing a book too. It's called, I Am Paying the Price for Your Freedom. Talk about confidence. The kind of confidence that you get when you publicly abuse a religion and get a pat on the back from your president. The United States is being invaded. No nukes, no weapons, just a few billion buzzing insects. They're called the cicadas, a type of insect that swarms the country every 17 years. People are unleashing their imagination on them. You've seen cicada musicians, miniature models, and cuisine. But that last one may not be for everyone. The US FDA has said that people allergic to seafood should stay away from them. Our next report tells you more about these reigning insects in America.
Take cover, America. The cicadas are here. It's an invasion 17 years in the making. Trillions of these insects have swarmed the United States. They are noisy, punctual, and beautiful in a creepy sort of way. There are nearly 3,400 species of cicadas. Only 7 of them have an internal clock. They spend 13 or 17 years underground, then emerge en masse for a brief and tragic invasion. They buzz, they mate, and they die, all in 3 weeks. But not before giving us some iconic moments. This New Jersey professor had a partnership in mind, combined the buzzing cicadas with his own tunes, sort of an interspecies musical collaboration.
You hear 3 basic musical strategies at work in these 3 species. For example, you hear doo, you hear that continuous tone. That's made by millions of cicadas doing this. Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Literally, that's what they do.
Before you judge the cicadas' talent, know this. They inspired Bob Dylan's legendary number, Days of the Locusts. He famously said, "The locusts sang, and they were singing for me." Where some saw musicians, others saw miniature models. Meet professional photographer Oksana Ware. She's got the cicadas posing for photo shoots. Check out some of these snaps. Here's one cicada shooting arrows, another picking weights, and capping it off, a cicada boy band. Others have more sinister plans. Marinate them, flash them in a pan, and serve for dinner. Cicada sushi and cicada tacos are on the menu. But what do they taste like? The popular opinion is tinned asparagus.
So at first, you can definitely feel a bit of the crunch, but if you start to chew it, it kind of just melts in. I wouldn't say it's anything weirdly texture-wise. I think the avocado and the toppings, it kind of helps.
Like them, hate them, or play music with them, the cicadas will always be on time. Most people hate their buzzing presence, but they actually do a lot of good for the environment. Once they die, the cicadas rot into the ground, enriching the soil with nutrients. They really are a fascinating species. Everything they do has a reason. Take the 17-year cycle, for instance. It took nearly 300,000 years for this cycle to emerge. This ensures there is no interspecies confusion during mating. Same with the mass invasion. They emerge by the trillions so that predators cannot wipe them out. Ingenious. There are two kinds of people in America right now. One, waiting for the invasion to end. The other, waiting for the next one in 2038. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Now, before we head into the weekend, I have a very strange story for you. It's about art, which in itself can be confusing. I mean, imagine staring at slabbed lines and colors and you're told there's a hidden story in there, but it can be hard to find. Even with a long description, strategically placed lights, and an art curator frantically trying to show you the hidden meaning, contemporary art can sometimes be very hard to make sense of. But nothing beats this. Imagine staring at a void, an empty room, or an empty space, and you're told it is art. A piece of art that is unrecognizable to human eye, invisible even to eagle and owl eyes, but a masterpiece nonetheless. What will you do? I'd say start looking for cameras because you may be getting pranked on live television. Alternatively, you can choose to sue the gallery for wasting your time or leave a bad review online. But there is someone living and breathing on this very planet who has bought a piece of invisible art for, wait for it, $18,000, 13 lakh rupees. The art or the absence of it that he or she bought is titled Lo Sono, or I Am. Well, here's what I am, incredulous. What does this piece of invisible art look like? Well, nothing. Hence, we don't have photos of it. You can stare at the wall, or the distance between you and the TV, or the empty space between you and your phone, and that's invisible art for you, empty space, vacuum. The artist, though, insists that he did create a piece of art, one that must be displayed in a 5 by 5 feet square room, a space that must be private, must have no artificial lighting, no air conditioning whatsoever. Is this a joke? No, it's not. It's art, or so the artist says. And I'm sure you want to know this artist's name. Salvatore Garau, 67 years old, from Italy, and he's very much on Instagram, so you can totally check him out, but only after you listen to the rest of this story. Now, this Mr. Garau has issued a certificate of authenticity to the buyer. It says his invisible art is real. He even has a message for the world, and you must listen to this. I have it here with me. It says, the successful outcome of the auction testifies to an irrefutable fact. The void is nothing but a space full of energy, and even if we empty it, and nothing remains, according to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that nothingness has a weight. Bear with me. It therefore has an energy that condenses and transforms itself into particles, in short, in us. When I decide to exhibit an immaterial sculpture in a given space, that space will concentrate a certain quantity and density of thoughts in a precise point, creating a sculpture that from my title alone will take the most varied forms. After all, don't we give shape to a god we have never seen? Are you confused? That's art. I told you it's confusing. This couple in South Korea will testify. In the month of April, they walked into a gallery at a mall in Seoul. They saw a piece of art. There were paint cans and used brushes lying below it. The couple thought it was participatory art, so they wasted no time before picking up the brushes and letting their creativity flow. They painted, they clicked photos. They walked out of the gallery feeling as satisfied as the artist who sold nothing for $18,000. But soon this couple was arrested. What for? Their creative crime. Turns out they were not supposed to paint on the canvas. What they painted over was a graffiti artwork by an American artist called John Won. He had made the piece in front of the audience, an audience in Seoul in 2016. The gallery kept the paint and brushes from the live performance as is and made it a part of the artwork and priced all of it at $500,000. The young couple painted all over the money. Let's come back to our Italian artist, Garau, the man of the hour and invisible art. Turns out, It's not the first time that his art has remained a figment of imagination. What you see is a piece titled Buddha in Contemplation. It is somewhere in the White Square. Garau says you don't see it, but the art exists. And it is made of air and spirit. This is what he says. It's a work that asks you to activate the power of the imagination, a power that anyone has, even those who don't believe that they have it. We don't know how much this void sold for, or whether a car crashed into it, or whether it was blown away by strong wind. But here's what we can tell you. Reports say that in 2005, Garau painted on a piece of tarpaulin. In 2006, he apparently created large ponds on the floors of 3 churches, and then he filled them with fish from nearby lake. Why on earth? Because art. Go figure. On that note, we are wrapping. We'll leave you with Gravitas images. Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Stay safe.